The first time my mother-in-law said it out loud, the clink of silverware stopped. We were in the middle of dinner, the kind of dinner she insisted on hosting twice a month, where the food was always heavy and the conversation was never safe. The chandelier above the table hummed softly, one of those old fixtures that never quite stopped buzzing. I remember noticing it because I needed something neutral to hold on to. She set her fork down carefully, too carefully. "You need to start giving me $10,000 every month," she said, her voice calm, almost bored. "If you don't, I'll make sure my son divorces you." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't smile. She spoke the way someone does when they think the outcome is already decided. My husband sat right beside me. He didn't move. I waited. I counted my breaths. 1, 2, 3. I expected him to laugh it off, or at least say, "Mom, that's not funny," or even look at me. He did none of those things. Instead, he stared at his plate like it had suddenly become very interesting. The mashed potatoes were untouched. The gravy had cooled into a glossy skin. In that moment, something inside me went very still. I was 31 years old, married for 4 years, no children yet. I worked full-time, paid half the bills, handled the house, remembered birthdays, showed up to every family event she demanded. I had swallowed a lot of small humiliations in the name of peace, but this wasn't small. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice level. My mother-in-law leaned back in her chair. She crossed her arms. "You heard me, $10,000 a month. It's not that much considering your job. And if you don't want to help family, then maybe you shouldn't be part of this one." She turned to her son. "Isn't that right?" This was his moment. I felt it physically, like a held breath between us. He cleared his throat. "Mom, maybe we shouldn't talk about money right now." That was it. No, not that's inappropriate, just maybe not right now. I looked at him. Really looked at him. The man I had married, the man who told me once that loyalty mattered more than anything. His jaw was tight. His eyes wouldn't meet mine. I realized then that this conversation had already happened, just not with me in the room. "What happens if I say no?" I asked. She smiled then, a thin smile that never reached her eyes. "Then I remind my son where his real obligations are, and you'll be very surprised how quickly things change when a marriage stops being convenient." The word convenient sat heavy in the air. I pushed my chair back slightly. The legs scraped against the hardwood floor, loud in the silence. "And you think threatening me at dinner is the best way to get money?" "I'm not threatening you," she said smoothly. "I'm giving you a choice." I turned to my husband. "Are you okay with this?" He swallowed. "Let's talk about this later." Later. That word followed me all the way home. The drive back was quiet. The streetlights blurred past the windshield. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my chest felt hollow. "Why didn't you say anything?" I finally asked. He sighed, rubbing his face. "You know how she is." That sentence, the excuse that had covered everything for years. "So you're just okay with this?" I asked. I didn't say that, he replied. "But she's my mother. She's helped us before." "She's never given me $10,000 a month," I said. He didn't answer. When we got home, he went straight to the bedroom. I stayed in the kitchen listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock above the stove. Ordinary sounds in a suddenly unfamiliar life. That night I didn't sleep. I lay awake thinking about all the little moments I had ignored, the comments about my job, the way she liked to remind me that her son could have married someone richer, the way he always asked me to keep the peace. I thought about what it meant that he hadn't defended me. And somewhere around 3 in the morning, a thought formed that scared me with how calm it felt. If she thought money was the lever that controlled my life, she had badly misunderstood who I was. I didn't know yet how this would end. I only knew one thing with absolute clarity. I would never pay her a dime, and I would never forget the way my husband stayed silent while his mother tried to buy my obedience. That dinner wasn't the beginning of my marriage falling apart. It was the moment I finally stopped pretending it wasn't already broken. The morning after that dinner, my husband acted like nothing had happened. He made coffee. He scrolled through his phone. He asked if I wanted eggs. I watched him from across the kitchen, studying the familiar lines of his face like I was seeing him for the first time. 4 years of marriage, and somehow I had missed this version of him. Or maybe I had chosen not to see it. "Are we going to talk about last night?" I asked. He didn't look up. "There's nothing to talk about yet." Yet. I poured myself coffee I didn't want. My stomach felt tight, like I'd swallowed a stone. "Your mother told me to give her $10,000 a month or she'd push you to divorce me." He finally looked at me, then, irritation flashing across his face. "She didn't mean it like that." "Then how did she mean it?" I asked. He sighed, already tired of the conversation. "She's under stress. You know she worries about money." I laughed once, sharp and humorless. Your mother lives in a house worth over $2 million. She takes 2 vacations a year. She drives a car I wouldn't even test drive without insurance. She's getting older, he said. She wants security. And your solution, I replied slowly, is to make me her retirement plan. That's not fair, he snapped. I'm asking you to be understanding. There it was again. Understanding. The word that always meant I was expected to absorb the discomfort so no one else had to. I want to be clear, I said, keeping my voice steady. I am not giving her money. His jaw tightened. You don't have to decide right now. I've decided, I said. He pushed his chair back, standing abruptly. You're being dramatic. I didn't respond. I watched him grab his keys and leave without another word. That day at work, I couldn't focus. Numbers blurred together on my screen. Every time my phone buzzed, my chest tightened, expecting another message from his mother. None came. That silence was deliberate. She was waiting. When I got home, there was a voicemail. Not from my husband. From her. Her voice was sweet, almost cheerful. I hope you're feeling better today. I know conversations like last night can be uncomfortable, but families sometimes need to have hard talks. Think about what I said. I only want what's best for my son. She never mentioned the money directly. She didn't have to. That night, my husband came home late. He ate reheated leftovers without comment. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, the television playing some meaningless show neither of us watched. Did you talk to her today? I asked. Yes, he said. And? She's worried, he replied. She feels like you don't respect her. I turned to him. She threatened me. He rubbed his temples. She feels threatened too. That was the moment something inside me shifted, not broke, shifted. I went into our bedroom and closed the door. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my hands. They weren't shaking. That surprised me. I started thinking practically. I had my own savings, my own income. My name was on the lease, but not on his mother's house, not on any family business. I had signed a prenup I barely remembered because I'd trusted him when he said it was standard. I pulled it out of the drawer that night. I read every word. The next morning, I made an appointment with a lawyer. I didn't tell my husband. Not yet. The lawyer was a woman in her late 50s, with calm eyes and a voice that didn't rush. She listened without interrupting as I explained everything. The dinner, the demand, the silence. When I finished, she leaned back slightly. This isn't about money, she said. This is about control. I know, I replied. Your mother-in-law believes she has authority over your marriage, she continued. And your husband hasn't corrected that belief. I swallowed. What are my options? She smiled gently. That depends on what you're willing to accept. On the drive home, her words echoed in my head. What was I willing to accept? That evening, my husband finally said what he'd been circling for days. Maybe he said carefully we could give her something smaller, just to keep the peace. I looked at him. You want me to pay her to stop threatening our marriage? She wouldn't see it that way, he said. I do. He raised his voice. Why are you making this such a big deal? I stood up. My heart was calm. That scared me more than anger ever could. Because this is extortion, I said. And because you're letting her do it. He stared at me, stunned. You're overreacting, he said. Every family has issues. I nodded slowly. Then maybe this family has one too many. That night I slept in the guest room. Not because I was angry, but because distance felt safer than pretending. And as I lay there in the dark, I realized something important. My mother-in-law thought the threat of divorce would scare me into obedience. She had no idea that the silence of my husband had already done far more damage than any threat ever could. The first thing my mother-in-law did when I didn't respond to her voicemail was escalate. Not loudly, not directly. She was far too experienced for that. She escalated the way people do when they believe silence is a weapon and patience is weakness. By the end of that week, everyone knew. My husband's aunt called to check in. His cousin texted asking if everything was okay between me and his mother. Even a neighbor I barely knew mentioned casually that my mother-in-law seemed very stressed about family matters. The message was clear. I was being positioned as the problem. At dinner that Friday, my husband finally said what he'd been avoiding. Mom's been upset, he said, not looking at me. She feels like you're pulling away. I replied. He frowned. Why? I stared at him, genuinely confused by the question. Because she threatened me, and you did nothing. She didn't threaten you, he said sharply. She made a suggestion. A suggestion tied to divorce, I replied. That's not a suggestion. That's leverage. He pushed his plate away. You're making her sound like a villain. I thought of the way she'd crossed her arms at that dinner table, the confidence in her voice, the way she'd already decided the outcome. I'm not making her anything, I said. I'm describing her. He stood abruptly. You always do this. You turn everything into a confrontation. No, I said quietly. I turned silence into clarity. He stared at me as if that sentence had landed somewhere he didn't know how to reach. The next morning she showed up at our door. No warning, no call. I was folding laundry when I heard the knock. 3 sharp taps, precise and deliberate. I didn't need to look through the peephole to know who it was. She stepped inside without waiting to be invited. "I thought it was time we talked face to face," she said, glancing around the living room like she was inspecting something she already owned. My husband hovered near the kitchen, suddenly interested in wiping down an already clean counter. She sat down and crossed her legs. "I hear you've been distant." "I've been busy," I replied. She smiled. "That's not what I mean." There it was, the correction, the assertion. "I don't want tension between us," she continued, "but I won't tolerate disrespect." I met her gaze. Threatening my marriage isn't respect. Her smile thinned. "Marriage is about sacrifice. So is extortion," I said. My husband finally spoke. "Can we all just calm down?" She waved a hand. "I'm calm. I'm just being realistic." She leaned forward slightly. $10,000 a month is nothing compared to the stability it provides, and I know you can afford it. That word again, afford. She wasn't asking for money. She was asking me to acknowledge her authority. "I'm not paying you," I said. The room went very quiet. Her eyes hardened. "Then you're choosing to make this difficult." "I'm choosing not to be bullied," I replied. She stood slowly. "You don't understand how families work." I stood too. "I understand exactly how this one works." She turned to her son. "Is this how you allow your wife to speak to me?" He looked at me, then at her. His mouth opened, closed. He said nothing. That silence was louder than anything she'd said. She nodded as if confirming something she'd already suspected. "I warned you," she said to me. "Consequences don't announce themselves." She left without another word. After the door closed, my husband exploded. "You didn't have to antagonize her." "I didn't," I said. I refused her. "She's my mother." "And I'm your wife," I replied. "Or am I just someone you expect to manage her for you?" He ran his hands through his hair. "Why are you doing this?" That question again, as if I were the one introducing chaos. "I'm not doing anything," I said calmly. "I'm responding." That night I didn't cry. I opened a new savings account. I gathered my personal documents. I made copies of everything that mattered. The following Monday, I met with the lawyer again. "She came to your house?" she asked. "Yes." "And your husband?" He watched. She nodded. "Then you need to prepare for the possibility that this marriage won't survive." "I already am," I said. That surprised me with how true it felt. That evening, my husband told me his mother wanted another family dinner. A chance to clear the air. I smiled faintly. "Tell her no." He stared. "You can't just refuse." "I can," I said, "and I am." His face hardened. "You're tearing this family apart." I looked at him steadily. "Your mother is trying to sell my marriage back to me for $10,000 a month. You're letting her. And you think I'm the one tearing something apart?" He had no answer. For the first time since that dinner weeks ago, I felt something solid under my feet. They thought pressure would make me fold. They didn't understand that the moment they showed me exactly who they were, the fear disappeared. What replaced it was something far more dangerous: resolve. And in the next chapter, they would learn that I wasn't just refusing to pay. I was preparing to take something back they never realized they were losing. The pressure didn't stop after that. It just changed shape. My mother-in-law stopped calling me directly. Instead, she worked through my husband the way she always had, applying just enough force to make him uneasy, just enough guilt to keep him compliant. I could see it in the way he came home tense, in the way he avoided my eyes, and how every conversation felt like it was happening on a delay. One evening, he sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, "She's worried about her future." I didn't look up from the bills I was sorting. "So am I." "She feels like she's losing control," he added, softer now. That was the first honest thing he'd said in weeks. "She never had control over me," I replied. "She just thought she did." He exhaled sharply. "Why can't you just compromise?" I finally looked at him. "Because compromise means both sides give something up. I'm the only one being asked to bleed." He stood pacing. "You're acting like this is some kind of war." "No," I said quietly. "I'm acting like this is extortion because it is." That night he slept on the couch. The next morning I woke up to an email from my bank confirming something I hadn't authorized. A scheduled transfer, not $10,000, but close enough to make my stomach drop. I logged in immediately. The transfer was pending, set up from our joint account. My hands went cold. When my husband came out of the bathroom, I was standing in the kitchen holding my phone. "Did you do this?" I asked. He froze. "I was just testing something. Testing what I demanded." "If it would go through," he said. "Mom said it would make things easier if we showed good faith." Good faith. I canceled the transfer in front of him. My fingers were steady. "You will never touch my money again without my consent," I said. He stared at me stunned. "You're being extreme." "No," I replied. "You crossed a line." His face hardened. "She's my mother. And this," I said, "is my life." That afternoon, I moved half of my savings into the separate account I'd opened. I changed passwords. I locked down access. I didn't announce it. I didn't threaten. I simply acted. 2 days later, the call came. She didn't bother pretending this time. "I heard you blocked the transfer," she said, her voice sharp. "Yes," I replied. "You're humiliating my son," she snapped. "I'm protecting myself," I said. She laughed short and cruel. "You think you're in control? You forget who raised him." "No," I said calmly. "I remember exactly who raised him. That's the problem." There was a pause. Then her voice dropped. "If you keep this up, he'll choose his family." "I am his family," I replied. "You're replaceable," she said. That word hit harder than any threat. "Maybe," I said, "but my dignity isn't." She hung up on me. That evening, my husband came home furious. "She's devastated," he said. "She says you're turning me against her." "I'm not turning you against anyone," I replied. "I'm asking you to stand with me." He slammed his keys on the counter. "Why is it always an ultimatum with you?" I stared at him, disbelief washing over me. "She gave me an ultimatum. I gave you a boundary." He shook his head. "I don't recognize you anymore." I nodded slowly. "That makes two of us." That night I packed a bag. Not dramatically, not in a rush, just enough clothes for a few days. My documents, my laptop. When he saw the bag by the door, his voice dropped. "What are you doing?" "I need space," I said. "To think?" He scoffed. "Running away won't solve anything." "I'm not running," I replied. "I'm stepping back so I can see clearly." I stayed with a friend that night, a woman I trusted. She didn't ask many questions. She didn't tell me to calm down or try harder. She listened. And as I lay awake on her couch, I realized something that should have terrified me but didn't. I felt lighter. The next morning, my lawyer called. "I reviewed your prenup again," she said. "Your mother-in-law has no legal claim to anything. And if your husband continues to attempt financial coercion, that strengthens your position." "My position for what?" I asked. "For whatever comes next," she replied. That afternoon, I received a message from my mother-in-law. This one wasn't angry. It was sweet. She wrote about family values, about forgiveness, about how misunderstandings happen, about how she'd always considered me like a daughter. I stared at the screen and felt nothing. The mask had slipped too many times. That evening, I called my husband. "We need to talk," I said. "About what?" he asked, guarded. "About the fact that you tried to move money without my consent," I said. "And about the fact that you still think this is normal." He was quiet. "I don't know how to fix this," he finally said. "You don't fix it," I replied. "You choose." Another silence. "I can't abandon my mother," he said. "I never asked you to," I replied. "I asked you to stop letting her abuse me." He had no answer. When I hung up, I felt a strange sense of calm. The threat of divorce no longer scared me, because what terrified me more was staying in a marriage where silence was the price of survival. And in that calm, a new understanding settled in. My mother-in-law thought money was the weapon. My husband thought avoidance was safety. Neither of them understood what I was becoming. I wasn't just refusing to pay. I was learning how to walk away with my self-respect intact. And once a woman learns that there's very little anyone can take from her again, living apart, even temporarily, changed the rhythm of my thoughts. Without my husband's presence filling the apartment with tension, I could hear myself again. The constant low-level anxiety I had learned to ignore slowly loosened its grip. I slept better. I ate without forcing it. I stopped bracing for the sound of his phone vibrating with another message from his mother. But peace, I learned, is threatening to people who rely on chaos to maintain control. On the third day after I left, my husband showed up at my friend's house unannounced. He stood on the porch with a tired expression, eyes rimmed with red, as if exhaustion itself might earn him sympathy. I stepped outside so my friend wouldn't have to witness what came next. "You're really doing this," he said. "I told you I needed space," I replied. "You didn't have to leave," he said. "You could have just calmed down." That phrase again, calm down, as if clarity were hysteria. "I'm calm," I said. "That's why I left." He ran a hand through his hair. "Mom thinks you're trying to punish her." I almost laughed. "Your mother thinks everything is about her." "She's hurt," he said. "She feels betrayed." I looked at him carefully. "Did she mention that you tried to move money without telling me?" He flinched, just slightly. "She said you're exaggerating," he replied. "Of course she did." I folded my arms. "Do you agree with her?" He hesitated. That hesitation stretched heavy and unmistakable. "I think you could have handled it better," he finally said. That was the moment I understood something fundamental. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was alignment. "You're not here to listen," I said. "You're here to convince me to comply." "That's not fair," he said quickly. "Then tell me," I replied, "what happens if I never give her money?" He swallowed. "She'll never forgive you." "And you?" I asked. He looked away. I nodded. "That's my answer." He left shortly after, frustrated, accusing me of being stubborn, of tearing the family apart, of choosing pride over harmony. I didn't argue. I watched him walk to his car and drive away, and for the first time I felt something close to relief. That evening my phone rang again. Her number. I let it go to voicemail. She left a long message this time, longer than before. Her tone was sorrowful, wounded, almost maternal. She talked about everything she'd done for her son, about sacrifices, about how women should support each other instead of creating division, about how money was just money but family was forever. She ended with a warning disguised as concern. "If you keep pushing him like this," she said softly, "you may lose him, and you won't get him back." I deleted the voicemail without saving it. The next morning, my lawyer called. "Your husband contacted my office," she said. My chest tightened. "About what?" "He asked about the financial consequences of separation," she replied calmly. "Specifically what he would owe you." I closed my eyes. "So he's planning," I said. "Yes," she replied, "and so should you." That afternoon, I requested copies of all joint financial statements. I documented everything: dates, conversations, attempts to move money, voicemails, texts. I wasn't angry while I did it. I was methodical. Preparation is quieter than panic. 2 days later, my mother-in-law made her next move. She showed up at my workplace. I saw her through the glass doors of the lobby before security stopped her. Perfectly dressed, perfect posture, a look of righteous concern on her face as if she were there to rescue someone. I felt my stomach drop, but my feet stayed planted. Security asked if I knew her. "Yes," I said, "but I'm not available." They escorted her out while she protested loudly enough for half the floor to hear. She said my name. She said family. She said she was worried about my well-being. By the time I got back to my desk, the whispers had already started. That was when the anger finally arrived. Not hot, not explosive. Cold. She had crossed another line. That evening, I called my lawyer again and told her everything. "This is harassment," she said, "and it strengthens your case." "For divorce?" I asked. "For protection," she replied, "and leverage." Leverage. A word my mother-in-law thought she understood. That night, my husband called again. His voice was strained. "Did you really have my mom escorted out of your office?" he asked. "She showed up uninvited," I replied. "At my job. That's not normal." "She was worried about you," he insisted. "She was trying to shame me," I said, "and you know it." "She's just emotional," he snapped. "So am I," I replied. "The difference is, I'm not using it to threaten anyone." Silence followed. "I can't keep choosing between you," he finally said. "You already have," I replied. When the call ended, I sat in the dark for a long time. I thought about the woman I had been when I married him, the compromises I had made, the way I had mistaken endurance for love. I thought about the dinner table where this all began, the calm cruelty in her voice, the silence beside me, and I realized something that settled deep in my bones. They thought the threat of divorce would break me. They were wrong. What broke was the illusion that this marriage had ever been a partnership. And once that illusion shattered, something stronger took its place. Certainty. I didn't know yet how this would end. But I knew this much. I would not be coerced. I would not be bought. And I would not beg a man to protect me from his own mother. The next chapter wouldn't be about surviving pressure. It would be about what happens when the people who thought they controlled you realize they never did. The papers arrived on a Tuesday. Not divorce papers, not yet. A formal letter from my husband's attorney delivered by certified mail informing me that my husband was seeking clarity regarding marital finances and temporary arrangements. The language was polite, neutral, carefully scrubbed of emotion. But the message underneath was clear. They were preparing to make this official. I sat at my friend's dining table, the envelope open in front of me, and felt something unexpected rise in my chest. Relief. Not because I wanted my marriage to end, but because the fog was lifting. When people stop pretending, you finally get to respond to reality instead of hope. I called my lawyer immediately. "This is a positioning move," she said after reading the letter. "They're trying to see if you'll panic, if you'll offer money to make this go away." "I won't," I replied. "I know," she said. "So now we prepare properly." Preparation became my anchor. We filed for a legal separation that afternoon. Not divorce. Separation. Enough to protect my finances, establish boundaries, and put the situation under the authority of the court instead of my mother-in-law's dinner table. When my husband found out, he was furious. He showed up at my friend's house again, unannounced, his anger barely contained. "You blindsided me," he said. I responded, I corrected. "You're making this public," he accused. "You're embarrassing my family." I looked at him steadily. "Your mother threatened me with divorce over money. She showed up at my job. You tried to move funds without my consent. What part of this was private to you?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. "You didn't even warn me," he said. "I warned you every time I asked you to stand up for me," I replied. He shook his head. "This is exactly what she said you'd do." There it was, the confirmation. "So you discussed this with her," I said. "She's my mother," he snapped. "And I was your wife," I replied. "But you consulted her before you ever listened to me." His shoulders sagged slightly, as if some part of him understood what he'd lost, but didn't know how to reach it. She just wanted security, he said weakly. No, I said. She wanted obedience. And she taught you to confuse the two. He left without another word. Within days, the tone changed again. My mother-in-law stopped being threatening and became generous. She sent messages through him, through relatives, even through a mutual family friend. She offered to drop the issue of the monthly payments. She suggested we start fresh. She hinted at gifts, assistance, forgiveness. It was all conditional. Come back, be quiet, fall back in line. I didn't respond. Then came the smear. It started subtly. Comments about my ambition, about how I was always focused on money, about how I was hard to please, about how I'd changed since getting married. I heard about it from people who didn't mean to gossip but couldn't help themselves. I documented everything. Dates, names, words. My lawyer nodded when I showed her. This will matter. What about him, I asked. She paused. He's been very careful, which tells me he's taking direction from his mother. The mediation session was scheduled for the following week. I walked into that room knowing two things. First, I was done negotiating my dignity. Second, my mother-in-law would be there whether she was supposed to be or not. She wasn't officially invited. She came anyway. She sat behind my husband close enough that her presence was unmistakable. Her posture was composed. Her expression was wounded but resolute. Like a woman attending a trial, she believed she would win. The mediator glanced at her, then at my lawyer. She's here for support, my husband said quickly. I almost smiled. The mediator explained the process. Temporary arrangements, financial transparency, boundaries. My mother-in-law couldn't stay quiet. This is all unnecessary, she said at one point. Families shouldn't air their problems like this. I leaned forward slightly. Then you shouldn't have threatened mine. The room went still. The mediator cleared his throat. Ma'am, I'll need you to refrain from speaking. She stiffened. I'm just trying to help. No, I said calmly. You're trying to control the outcome. My husband stared straight ahead. We discussed finances. My lawyer presented documentation, attempts to move funds, harassment at my workplace, recorded voicemails. My mother-in-law's face tightened with every detail. This was no longer a private conversation she could dominate. This was a record. When the session ended, temporary orders were issued. Financial separation, no contact outside of legal counsel, no third-party interference, especially not from parents. As we left the building, my mother-in-law caught up to me in the hallway. You think you've won, she said quietly. I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman who believed money bought loyalty and fear ensured obedience. This was never a competition, I replied. It was a boundary. You just kept crossing it. She scoffed. You'll regret this. I shook my head. I already regret trusting you. That night I went back to my own apartment, not the guest room, not my friend's couch, my space, my lease, my quiet. I unpacked slowly, deliberately. Each item I put away felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The silence didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. My phone buzzed once. A message from my husband. I'm trying to understand where I lost you. I stared at it for a long moment before typing back. You didn't lose me. You never chose me. I set the phone down and turned off the light. For the first time since that dinner, I slept deeply. They had believed pressure would make me surrender. Instead, it forced me to stand up in a way I never had before. And as Chapter 6 closed, one truth had become impossible to ignore. The moment they tried to put a price on my marriage was the moment they lost any claim to my obedience. What they didn't know yet was this. The real consequences were only just beginning. The first consequence arrived quietly. No shouting, no dramatic confrontation, just an absence where certainty used to be. A week after the mediation, my husband's paycheck was garnished for temporary support. Not a large amount, but enough to sting. Enough to remind him that courts don't negotiate the way his mother did. Enough to shift the balance of power out of her dining room and into a place she couldn't control. She called him constantly after that. I knew because he texted me for the first time since my message. She's panicking. She thinks you're trying to ruin me. I read it twice before responding. This was never about ruining you. It was about protecting myself. He didn't reply. Word traveled fast through his family, faster than I expected. An aunt I barely spoke to sent a long message about forgiveness and grace. A cousin hinted that I was being too aggressive for a woman my age. Someone else suggested therapy. Someone always suggests therapy when they don't want to talk about accountability. What none of them said out loud was this: the system had stopped favoring my mother-in-law, and it terrified them. She tried to regain footing the only way she knew how, through shame. She told people I was greedy, that I had always cared about money, that I was punishing her son because I couldn't control him, that I was ungrateful for everything the family had done for me. It almost worked. Almost. Until she overplayed her hand. One afternoon, I received a call from a woman I didn't recognize. She introduced herself as a friend of my mother-in-law's from church. Her voice was hesitant, uncomfortable. "I don't want to get involved," she said, "but I thought you should know. She's been asking people for money." I closed my eyes slowly. "What do you mean?" "She says she's in trouble," the woman continued, "that her son's wife froze him out financially, that she needs help covering expenses until things are resolved." The room felt suddenly very still. "How much?" I asked. "She mentioned $10,000 a month," the woman said quietly. "The same amount she said you refused to give her." I thanked her and hung up. There it was, the truth she couldn't hide. This was never about helping her son. It was never about family stability or respect. It was about her lifestyle, her expectations, her belief that someone else should fund the life she felt entitled to live. I forwarded the information to my lawyer immediately. "This is important," she said, "very important." Within days, we added it to the record. Not accusations, documentation, names, dates, statements, patterns. The court doesn't care about drama. It cares about behavior. When my husband found out he finally broke, he showed up at my apartment late one evening, knocking softly, like he already knew he wasn't welcome. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. "She's been lying," he said, voice hollow, "about everything." I studied his face. He looked smaller somehow, less certain. "She told people I abandoned you financially," he continued. "She said you were trying to bleed me dry." I nodded. "She told me I was replaceable." He flinched. "I didn't know she was asking others for money," he said. "I swear." "I believe you," I replied. That surprised him. "Then why does this still feel over?" he asked. "Because it was. Because I said gently you only started questioning her when it affected you." His shoulders sagged. "She's my mother," he whispered. "I didn't know how to stop her." "You never tried," I replied. "You asked me to absorb her instead." He looked at me, eyes wet. "I'm sorry." I waited, not for the apology, for myself. It came too late. "I believe you're sorry," I said, "but remorse isn't the same as repair." He nodded slowly. "What happens now?" "I keep moving forward," I replied. "You decide who you want to be without asking her first." He didn't ask to come in. He left quietly. The next mediation session was shorter. The mediator addressed my mother-in-law directly this time, not harshly, firmly. "You are not a party to this marriage," he said, "and you will no longer involve yourself in its finances." She bristled. "I'm only trying to protect my son." The mediator looked at her over his glasses. "Then you should stop putting him at risk." She said nothing after that. Temporary orders became longer-term protections. No financial entanglement, no contact outside legal channels, no harassment. For the first time since this began, the rules were clear. That night, I sat alone in my apartment and let the silence settle. I wasn't triumphant. I was tired. But it was the good kind of tired. The kind that comes after you've stopped running. I thought about the dinner that started it all, the casual cruelty, the assumption that fear would make me compliant. I thought about how close I came to giving in, how tempting it would have been to write a check and buy temporary peace, and I understood something deeply. Peace that costs your dignity is never peace, it's just quiet suffering. My mother-in-law had believed money was her leverage. She had believed her son's loyalty was guaranteed. She had believed I would choose comfort over confrontation. She was wrong on all 3 counts. As Chapter 7 closed, I didn't feel victorious. I felt awake. And once you wake up to manipulation, you can't unsee it. The next chapter wouldn't be about defense anymore. It would be about what happens when the person who built their power on intimidation realizes the world has stopped responding to it. The silence after power collapses is never empty. It hums. I felt it in the days that followed, in the way my phone stopped lighting up with indirect pressure and started filling with cautious inquiries instead. People who had once repeated my mother-in-law's version of events now asked neutral questions. Careful ones. The kind people ask when they realize they may have backed the wrong narrative. "How are you holding up? Is everything okay legally? I hope this resolves peacefully." Peacefully. That word again, always appearing when accountability gets uncomfortable. My mother-in-law did not handle the shift well. Without access to me, without control over her son's finances, without the ability to corner me at dinner or weaponize family gatherings, she lost the stage she had always relied on. And people like her don't disappear quietly when that happens. They look for new leverage. The first attempt came through sympathy. She began telling people she was sick, not seriously, not enough to be hospitalized, just enough to invite concern, fatigue, stress-related issues, blood pressure, the vague illnesses that can't be disproven but always demand attention. My husband called me one evening, his voice tight. "She's not well," he said. "This is really taking a toll on her." I closed my eyes. "What kind of toll?" I asked. She's barely sleeping, he said. She says the stress of the situation is making everything worse. The situation, not her behavior, not her demands, not her threats. The situation. I'm sorry she's unwell, I said carefully, but her health doesn't give her permission to control my life. He sighed. Can't you just ease up for her sake? There it was. I felt the familiar pull, the old instinct to soften, to compromise, to absorb. And then I remembered her voice at that dinner table. Calm, confident, certain she could buy my obedience. No, I said, I won't. There was a long pause. You're being very hard, he said finally. No, I replied. I'm being consistent. He didn't call again after that. The second attempt came through guilt. She sent a letter, not an email. A handwritten letter delivered to my apartment through a mutual relative who clearly didn't want to be involved but felt obligated. I almost didn't open it. Curiosity won. She wrote about raising her son alone after his father passed, about sacrifice, about how she had always put family first, about how she had welcomed me once and now felt rejected. She never mentioned the money. She never mentioned the threat. She never mentioned showing up at my workplace. The omissions were louder than the words. At the end, she wrote, I hope one day you understand how much you've hurt me. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Understanding does not require submission. The third attempt was the most dangerous. She tried to regain control through fear. I found out through my lawyer. She's been speaking to people about contesting future support arrangements, my lawyer said, claiming you manipulated her son, suggesting emotional abuse. My jaw tightened. Does she have grounds, I asked? No, she replied calmly, but accusations alone can create noise. Noise, that was her specialty. She's trying to provoke a reaction, my lawyer continued. If you respond emotionally, it feeds her narrative. I won't, I said, and I didn't. Instead, I focused on my own life. I went back to my routines. Work, exercise, even small pleasures I had neglected. Cooking meals slowly, walking without checking my phone, sleeping without bracing for the next escalation. I noticed how much energy I had spent managing her emotions, her expectations, her moods, and how much lighter I felt without that burden. Then something unexpected happened. Her influence began to crack from the inside. My husband called me late one night, not angry, not defensive, just tired. She's mad at me now, he said quietly. For what I asked. For not fixing this, he replied. For letting it get this far. I said nothing. She says I chose you over her, he continued. I almost laughed. No, I said softly. She's upset because she no longer controls either of us. He was quiet for a long time. I don't know who she is anymore, he admitted. I swallowed. This is who she's always been. You just never had to see it this clearly. That was the first honest conversation we'd had in months. Not reconciliation, recognition. In the weeks that followed, more cracks appeared. Family members stopped returning her calls as quickly. Church friends became distant. People who had lent her money quietly asked about repayment. Her narrative had worked only as long as it stayed contained. Once exposed to daylight, it lost its grip. I didn't celebrate. I observed. I learned. This wasn't about revenge, it was about consequence. When you build authority on fear and obligation, the moment people stop complying, everything collapses. One evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, I realized something that made my chest ache. I no longer felt afraid of her. Not because she'd changed, but because I had. The woman who once questioned herself at a dinner table, who wondered if she was being unreasonable, who hoped silence would protect her marriage no longer existed. In her place was someone steadier, someone clearer, someone who understood that love does not require self-erasure. As Chapter 8 closed, one truth stood firm. My mother-in-law believed she could force me into obedience by threatening my marriage. What she never understood was this. The moment someone threatens to take your life apart, unless you pay them, they stop having any power over you at all. And the next chapter would show exactly how far desperation can push someone who has lost control. Desperation changes people. It strips away patience, replaces calculation with impulse, and exposes the truths they've spent years hiding behind politeness. I saw it clearly in my mother-in-law as her options narrowed and her influence slipped through her fingers. The first sign was the phone call I wasn't supposed to hear about. My lawyer mentioned it casually during one of our regular check-ins. She contacted my office, she said, flipping through her notes. Not directly. Through an intermediary. My stomach tightened. About what? She wanted to know if there was any way to bypass the separation agreement, my lawyer replied. Specifically, if she could be recognized as a dependent. I laughed once short and incredulous. A dependent. Yes, she said. She claimed her son supports her financially and that you disrupted that arrangement. That was the moment the situation crossed from manipulative to reckless. She has no legal standing, my lawyer continued. But the fact that she's asking tells me she's running out of ideas. Running out of ideas made her dangerous. Within days, she escalated again. This time she went after my reputation directly. A coworker pulled me aside after a meeting. "I don't know if this is my place," she said gently, "but someone called HR asking questions about you." My heart pounded, but my voice stayed calm. "What kind of questions?" "About your stability," she replied. "Whether you've been under emotional stress, whether there were concerns about your behavior at work." I didn't need to ask who had made the call. I documented everything and sent it to my lawyer immediately. "This is retaliation," she said, "and it's backfiring." How I asked. "Because HR documented the call," she replied, "and because it establishes a pattern of harassment beyond the family context." My mother-in-law had always believed she could operate without consequences as long as she framed her actions as concern. This time the frame didn't hold. My husband found out about the HR call before I did. He showed up at my apartment later that evening looking shaken. "She called your job?" he said, stunned. "Why would she do that?" I studied him. "Because she's scared." He ran a hand over his face. "She said she was worried about your mental health." I met his eyes. "Did you believe her?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "No, that was new." "I told her to stop," he said quietly. "I told her she was crossing a line." And I asked. "She said you were poisoning me against her," he replied, "that you turned me into someone who would abandon his own mother." I exhaled slowly. "And what did you say?" "I said she was wrong," he admitted, "that I made my own choices." The room felt suddenly very still. That was the first time he had ever said that out loud. The shift didn't go unnoticed. Within days, my mother-in-law began contacting extended family again, but this time her tone was frantic rather than controlled. She complained about betrayal, about disrespect, about how ungrateful I was after everything she had done. What she didn't realize was that people were listening differently now. They asked questions. Why would you demand money from your daughter-in-law? Why would you threaten divorce? Why would you show up at her workplace? She didn't have good answers. Her story fractured under scrutiny. The final straw came during a family gathering I wasn't present for. My husband told me about it later, his voice heavy with something like grief. "She told everyone you owed her," he said, "that you promised to support her and then backed out." "That's a lie," I replied. "I know," he said. "I told them that." I sat down slowly. "You did?" "Yes," he said. "I told them exactly what she said at dinner. The amount, the threat." My chest tightened. "They were shocked," he continued. "Some of them didn't believe it at first. But then she started yelling. Yelling. I could picture it easily. She accused me of choosing you over blood," he said, "of betraying her." "And what did you do?" I asked. "I left," he said. "I walked out." I closed my eyes. That moment, more than any legal order or formal boundary, marked the collapse of her authority. Control only works when everyone agrees to participate in the illusion. She had lost that agreement. The next mediation update came swiftly. My lawyer called with an edge of satisfaction she usually avoided. "We're filing an addendum," she said. "Harassment, reputational interference, and attempted financial coercion through third parties." "What does that mean for her?" I asked. "It means the court is watching her now," she replied, "closely." The idea of a judge scrutinizing her behavior terrified my mother-in-law far more than losing money ever had. She stopped calling. She stopped writing. For the first time since this began, she disappeared. The silence felt different this time. Not strategic, not calculated. Empty. My husband texted me late one night. "I think I finally understand what you meant about control." I stared at the message for a long time. Understanding didn't undo the past, but it did change the future. I replied simply, "I hope so." That night I lay awake thinking about how power shifts, not in explosions, but in quiet moments when people stop obeying. My mother-in-law had built her life around the assumption that fear and obligation were permanent currencies. She never imagined what would happen if someone refused to pay. As Chapter 9 closed, one truth stood unmistakable. She wasn't losing because I fought her. She was losing because everyone else stopped believing her. And when belief disappears, control follows it into the dark. The next chapter would deal with the aftermath. Not hers, mine. When the noise finally stopped, I didn't celebrate. I waited. People who rely on chaos rarely disappear forever. They retreat, regroup, and look for a new opening. I had learned that lesson too well to mistake silence for surrender. The first sign that things were changing came from an unexpected place. My husband asked to meet me, not at my apartment, not at a lawyer's office, somewhere neutral, somewhere public. A small cafe halfway between our neighborhoods. I arrived early and chose a table near the window. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. His shoulders were slumped, his clothes rumpled. The confidence he used to borrow from his mother's certainty was gone. He sat down slowly, like someone unsure if he was allowed to take up space. "Thank you for coming," he said. I nodded. "You said it was important." He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup, but didn't drink. "I moved out of our house. That caught my attention. "You were living with her again?" I asked. "Temporarily," he said. "After you left. She said it would help me get perspective." "And did it?" I asked. He let out a humorless breath. "It did the opposite." He told me everything then. How she monitored his calls, how she read his messages, how she criticized him for not controlling me better, how every conversation turned into a reminder that he owed her for raising him. "She kept saying you turned me against her," he said. "But the truth is, I started hearing things I'd ignored my whole life." I listened without interrupting. "She talked about money constantly," he continued, "about how much you should be giving, about how unfair it was that she didn't benefit from our marriage." My jaw tightened. "She said marriage is an investment," he said quietly, "and that you failed to deliver returns." There it was, the core belief. "She told me I needed to choose," he said. "Her or you?" I studied his face. "And what did you choose?" He swallowed. "I chose to leave." The word hung between us. "I'm not asking you to come back," he said quickly. "I know I don't deserve that. I needed you to know I finally see it." I nodded slowly. "Seeing it doesn't undo it." "I know," he said, "but I needed to say it out loud." We sat in silence for a moment, not tense, just honest. "She's furious," he added. "She says you poisoned me." "I didn't," I replied. "I stopped absorbing her." He nodded. "She's scared," he admitted. "She doesn't know how to function without control." That part almost made me feel sorry for her. Almost. The legal update came later that week. My lawyer called to tell me the court had issued a formal warning. Any further attempts by my mother-in-law to interfere would result in sanctions, financial penalties, potential restraining orders. "She's been advised to cease all contact," my lawyer said, "with both of you." For someone like her, that was devastating. Silence wasn't just absence. It was exposure. Days passed, then weeks. No calls, no letters, no intermediaries. Life began to feel strangely ordinary again. I returned fully to my routines. Work, exercise, friends. I stopped flinching when my phone rang. I stopped rehearsing responses in my head. One evening, as I cleaned my apartment, I came across something I hadn't touched in months. Our wedding album. I sat on the floor and flipped through it slowly. The smiles, the promises, the way I had believed love would be enough to protect me from his family's expectations. I didn't cry. I felt clarity. That woman in those photos had been hopeful, earnest, willing to compromise herself for harmony. I didn't blame her. She didn't know better yet. A week later, my husband sent me a message. "I've started therapy." I stared at it for a long time. "Good," I typed back. "For you, not for us." He didn't argue. Another message followed later that night. "She asked me to ask you to forgive her." I closed my eyes. "Tell her forgiveness doesn't come from pressure," I replied. "It comes from accountability." He didn't respond. The final piece fell into place quietly. My lawyer informed me that my mother-in-law had tried to sell one of her properties. Not for profit, for liquidity. The lifestyle she had been funding through control and expectation was no longer sustainable. The $10,000 she demanded had never been symbolic. It had been necessary. She had counted on my compliance to maintain her sense of power and her standard of living. When I refused, the structure collapsed. I didn't feel triumph. I felt validation. That night, I sat alone on my balcony and watched the city lights flicker on. Cars moved below, lives continued, unaware of the private war that had ended without fireworks. I thought about everything that had happened since that dinner, how quickly things escalated, how deeply I had been tested, and I understood something important. This story wasn't about revenge. It was about refusing to be bought, about understanding that love tied to obligation is not love at all. As Chapter 10 closed, I felt steady, not victorious, not bitter, just awake. 2 chapters remained. They wouldn't be about her manipulation or his silence. They would be about what comes after you reclaim yourself, and how choosing dignity once changes everything that follows. What surprised me most after everything went quiet was how unfamiliar peace felt. I had spent so long anticipating the next escalation, the next manipulation, the next demand disguised as concern, that when none came, my body didn't quite trust it. I would wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, certain I'd missed something. A message, a threat, a new angle. There was nothing. Slowly, carefully, I let myself believe it. I started rebuilding my life in small, deliberate ways, not dramatic changes, just choices that were mine alone. I rearranged my apartment. I threw away things I'd kept only because someone else liked them. I bought groceries without checking anyone else's preferences. I cooked meals I wanted at the time I wanted and ate them without rushing. For the first time in years, my days belonged to me. Friends noticed the change before I did. "You seem lighter," one of them said over lunch, "like you're not carrying something anymore." I smiled because she was right. I had been carrying other people's expectations for so long that I'd forgotten how heavy they were. My husband and I continued communicating, but only through agreed channels. Calm, respectful, limited. The legal separation moved forward without drama. No more surprise letters, no more threats, and no more interference. He told me once during a brief check-in that his mother barely spoke to him now. "She says I betrayed her," he said quietly. I didn't react. "She says everything she did was for my own good," he added. I nodded. She probably believes that. That was the difference between us now. I no longer needed him to see her the way I did. I needed him to see himself clearly. "How do you feel about it?" I asked. He thought for a long moment. "I feel free, and guilty about feeling free." "That feeling passes," I said gently, "when you stop confusing guilt with love." He looked at me, then really looked at me, and I could tell something fundamental had shifted. "I wish I'd protected you," he said. I believed him. But belief didn't mean reversal. "I wish you had too," I replied, "but wishing doesn't rebuild trust." He nodded, accepting it without argument. That night I reflected on how much I had changed. I used to explain myself constantly, to soften my words, to anticipate reactions and manage them before they happened. I had thought that made me considerate. Now I understood it had made me invisible. I stopped explaining. Not in anger, in confidence. When people asked how I was doing, I answered honestly. When they probed for details, I gave none. When they tried to reframe the story to make it more comfortable for themselves, I didn't correct them. I didn't need control of the narrative anymore. I had control of my life. The legal process moved toward its conclusion with quiet efficiency. No court drama, no public spectacle, just signatures, disclosures, timelines. During one meeting, my lawyer leaned back and said, "You handled this better than most." "How so?" I asked. "You never tried to punish anyone," she said. "You protected yourself and let the consequences speak." That mattered to me, because revenge had never been the goal. Freedom was. One afternoon, I ran into my mother-in-law by accident. I was leaving a grocery store when I saw her across the parking lot. She looked smaller somehow, less composed. She hesitated when she saw me, clearly unsure whether to approach. For a moment, I wondered if she would. She didn't. She turned away and walked in the opposite direction. I stood there watching her go and felt something I hadn't expected. Nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no sadness. Just distance. That was when I knew I had truly let go. Later that week, my husband sent one final message. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I'm trying to be better." I stared at the words for a long time before replying. "I hope you become someone you don't have to excuse anymore." That was all. As I prepared for the final legal steps, I took time to think about the woman I had been before all this began. The one sitting at that dinner table stunned into silence, wondering if she was overreacting, wondering if peace was worth the price she was being asked to pay. I wished I could tell her something. Not to be braver, not to be louder. Just this. If someone threatens to take your life apart unless you comply, they have already forfeited any claim to your loyalty. I didn't know what the future would look like yet, but I knew what it would not include. Extortion disguised as family, silence mistaken for love, obedience sold as respect. As Chapter 11 closed, I felt grounded in a way I never had before. Not because everything was resolved, but because I finally understood my own worth didn't require anyone else's approval. And the final chapter would be about that truth, not as a lesson, but as a life. The last document was signed on a gray Thursday afternoon. No courtroom, no audience, just a conference room with muted lighting, a stack of papers, and the quiet finality of ink drying on a page. The marriage ended the way it had unraveled, without drama, without shouting, without the spectacle my mother-in-law had always thrived on. When I walked out of the building, the air felt sharper, cleaner. I paused on the steps for a moment, not because I was overwhelmed, but because I wanted to mark it. Endings deserve recognition, even quiet ones. I didn't feel like I had lost something. I felt like I had returned something that never belonged to me. In the weeks that followed, people asked careful questions. "How are you holding up? Are you okay? Do you regret it?" I answered honestly. I was okay, better than okay, and no, I didn't regret it. What I regretted was how long I had mistaken endurance for love. How easily I had believed that keeping the peace was my responsibility even when that peace required me to disappear. The truth was simpler now. Love does not demand payment. Family does not issue ultimatums. Respect does not come with conditions. My ex-husband moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. He kept his distance, honoring the boundaries we'd agreed on. Occasionally he sent updates. Therapy was helping. He was learning how much of his life had been shaped by fear rather than choice. I wished him well, from afar. As for my former mother-in-law, I heard very little. Someone mentioned she downsized. Someone else said she stopped hosting gatherings. Her world had shrunk to the size of the control she could no longer exert. I didn't take pleasure in it. I took responsibility for not stepping back into it. I focused on rebuilding, not reinventing. I didn't need to become someone new. I needed to become someone uninterrupted. I took a short trip alone, something I'd never done while married. No schedule, no compromise, just movement. I walked unfamiliar streets, ate when I was hungry, rested when I was tired. Every decision felt like a small declaration. I'm allowed to choose. One evening, sitting by a window in a quiet cafe, I thought about that dinner again. The calm cruelty of her voice, the way my husband had stayed silent, the weight of the moment when I realized I was alone at that table. I didn't flinch at the memory anymore. I understood it. That was the moment I stopped negotiating my worth. I didn't know it then, but I know it now. The threat had been meant to trap me. Instead, it revealed the truth. Anyone who tries to buy your obedience does not see you as family. Anyone who stays silent while you're threatened has already chosen their side. And anyone who demands $10,000 a month for peace is not offering peace at all. They're selling fear. I no longer participate in that economy. Months later, I hosted a small dinner of my own. Friends, laughter, food that didn't feel heavy with expectation. When someone raised a glass and asked what I was celebrating, I answered without hesitation. My freedom, I said. They smiled. They understood. I didn't tell the story as a warning. I told it as a reminder that women are not support systems for other people's entitlement, that marriage is not a transaction, that silence is not the same as loyalty, and that walking away from manipulation is not failure. It is clarity. As this chapter closes, I don't ask for sympathy. I don't ask for validation. I ask only this. If you have ever sat at a table where someone tried to put a price on your dignity, remember this story. Remember that moment. Remember how quickly love disappears when obedience is refused. And remember that the most powerful revenge is not retaliation. It is refusing to be controlled. If this story resonated with you, if you've lived something like it, or if you're still sitting at that table wondering whether you're allowed to stand up, share your thoughts. Leave a comment. Subscribe for more stories like this. You're not imagining it, and you're not alone. This is where my story ends, and where my life truly began.